Hello class and welcome again to another lesson 11 of JavaScript playlist. In our previous lesson we have looked at the concept of JavaScript data types. In this particular lesson we want to look on JavaScript functions, and the objective of this lesson first is to define what is a function and to define how to declare or how to create a function, how to pass parameters to a function, and how to define the function logic within the function body, and how to call a function. With that said, let us get an explanation in theory form and then we can follow the practical. A JavaScript function, a function is a block of code which can be written to perform a specific task. Think of your program. You can have a very large program which does different tasks, or let's say you're building a simple calculator application, and within that application there are so many tasks that needs to be done. So you can break down your tasks into simple, smaller manageable tasks that you can now create each function for each task. And that way functions allow you to break down your code into a manageable segments. This one should be break down your code, to break down your code into a manageable segments that you can manage and debug easily. Functions also help you to reuse the code, so that when you have one function that does a specific task, anywhere you want to perform that task, you don't have to write the code again. You have to call that function and reuse it over and over again. And functions in JavaScript are defined using the function keyword, followed by the function name, and followed by the parentheses, and within the parentheses we provide the parameters, and then followed by the curly brackets which define the function body. Within the curly brackets we write the logic or the code for that particular function. The function may or may not return a value. After defining the function, we can then use the function by calling it using its name and providing it the parameters it needs. So with that function, with that theory said, let's get started and see how we can create a simple function to do a simple arithmetic calculation. So I'm going to get over to my Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to remove this previous code that we had written earlier. And now within this file, I'm going to create a simple JavaScript function that multiplies two numbers and returns the result. So to create that function, we're going to use the function keyword, followed by the function name. And the name of the function, you can give it any name which relates to what the function does. So I'm going to say multiply two numbers, and within this I'm going to provide the parameters. So this function takes in two numbers, so I'm going to give it num1 comma num2. So if you have more than one parameters, you separate them using the comma. And then after that, I'm going to define the function body using the curly braces. And within the function body, I'm going to go ahead and write the logic for this function. How can we multiply the two numbers? So to multiply two numbers, I'm going to initialize a variable using let keyword, and I'm going to say call it result, and I'm going to assign I multiply num1 by num2, and then I store the result in this variable called result. And then lastly, I can log the result. Not even logging the result, I can return the result. So this function does two things. It multiplies two numbers and stores the result in this variable, and then it returns that result to wherever we are calling the function. Now below this line outside the function body, I'm now going to call the function. So I'm going to have a variable called const division, multiplication, is equals to, and then now I can call the function. And when we are calling the function, we use the function name, multiply two numbers. And on calling the function, we use the parentheses and we pass in the values that represents num1 and num2. So let me pass 40 and 7. So when this function is called, then this 40 will be replaced in place of num1 and 7 will be replaced in place of num2. And then after that, this logic will execute. And finally, the result will be returned. And when the result is returned from this function, we stored in this variable called mult. And then below it, we can go ahead and log the result, console.log. And now I'm going to log mult. Now the mult contains the result. Now I'm going to save this program, and now let us run the program. Let me clear the console, and then now run the program. When I press enter, you're going to see that the output is printed on this screen 280, because 40 times 7 is 280. So let's look on how does this function run. So when we type node course-page.js and press enter, the first thing that happens is that the code starts running from line 1. It gets this is a function. It will skip this function and it will come to line 6. It will initialize this variable called mult, and then it will call the function. When this function is called, then the call goes back to this function and it takes these two values, replaces them with num1 and num2 respectively, and then it runs this line, it executes this line, and then secondly it executes this line and returns the value. When this line finishes executing, the result is assigned to this mult, and then finally the code proceeds to line 7 and it will now print that value. So that's an example of defining a function. Again, I'm going to define a second function, and this function now I want it to simply print. I want it to do the addition, add two numbers. And here I'm going to give it num1 and num2. Then I'm going to define the function body. And how do we add a number? Maybe I'm going to declare a variable called sum, and I'm going to say num1 plus num2. And then I'm going to log console.log and say the sum of two numbers is sum. And then I'm going to stop that function from there. So then I'm coming to this line 10 and I'm going to call add two numbers. And these two numbers, I have to provide now the two numbers, that is, let me say 60, 70. And now let me remove these lines here to avoid confusion. And now you can see this second function does not have a return value. It simply adds the two values given and then it prints the result within that function. And that's why we are saying a function may or may not return a value. So based on your logic, you might return a value or you may not return a value. So when I call this function, when I go here and run this program now, you will see it prints out the sum of two numbers is 130. What happens here is that when this program is run, it will start executing. It will come on this line and finds that it is a function. It will jump it. It will come to line 6 and find also it is a function. It will jump it. And when it comes to line 10, it finds this is a function call. And when this function is called, here we are calling a function. When the function is called, the execution is returned back to that function, so the code goes back again here. The compiler goes back to this function with that name, and it takes these two values, substitute them with num1 and num2 respectively, and then it runs this line of code which does num1 plus num2 and assign the result in sum, and then it does this line which prints the result. So you can see now you have a function which adds two numbers. Anytime you can call this function as many times as you want. You can come again here and call add two numbers. This time around you can provide a different number, 9 and 5. Alright, so now when you clear this console and look again, you're going to see now the function runs twice because we are now calling it two times. The first call and the second function call. Otherwise, that's all about JavaScript functions. The concept I want you to get here is how to create a simple function, how to define the parameters, and also how to return a value. Some functions may not even have parameters. Let's define the third one here. So we're going to have a third function, and we can call it print statement or print text. Call it print text. And now this function does not have any parameters, and maybe within this function we are just interested in logging or printing some text. So we say console, this is a function with no parameters. Parameters are nothing but the data that the function should work with, or the data the function manipulates. So when we save that and we come down now here, let me now call that function print text. So if it does not have any parentheses, then we just call it without passing any parameters into it. So when the compiler runs this code, the compiler will start at line 1 and jump it to line 6, and then it will also jump to line 10, and then it will jump straight to line 13, and when it finds line 13 is a function call. So it will go back again and look where is this function, and it finds this function is right here, and it will start executing whatever code is written within this function body. And now this code says print this statement that we have added within the quotation marks. So now when I run this program, you're going to see that the function print text has been called and the text has been logged on the screen. So that's all about the function, how to define, declare, and return a function, and also how to call a function. With that said, I want to pause this video here, and in our next lesson we'll look at the concept of JavaScript objects. Otherwise, thank you for joining the class, and see you in our next class.